Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at working with our inlet manifold pressure estimate table tuning in this training module. Now, the estimate table is very important if we have a failure of our map pressure sensor, so the inlet manifold pressure sensor that's fitted to the intake manifold. If that fails for any reason, might be a wiring problem, it becomes unplugged, maybe the sensor goes bad and we're in racing conditions, we want to have a way that we can call on a value that can be an estimated value that's very close to the actual reading of our inlet manifold pressure sensor, so that we can still continue to calculate things like our engine load and deliver the proper fueling and spark timing to the engine, so we can at least get the engine off track safely and not go into a dangerous condition or where the engine just completely shuts off. So we want to use the estimate table to have as a fail-safe backup to our map pressure sensor. We'll find that the estimate table is also used in fuel film or transient fueling calculations. So we also want to make sure that this table is in order and calibrated properly, because as we start to talk about the fuel film transient type of tuning, we're going to be covering that in a future training tutorial. This table also needs to be calibrated and tuned. So we want to make sure for both purposes that it's set up correctly. So in order to do that, we need to go into a specific tab or page here I've created for the estimate tuning, which we can find right here on our tuning options. So we have our tuning workbook here. We're going into our estimate page. Now within this page, we're going to find that we have this table here, and we can see it's inlet manifold pressure estimate main percent. This table is pretty simple. It works based off engine speed and throttle angle. Now, depending on what throttle angle we're at and what engine speed we're at, we'll find we have values populated in the table. These values are going to be an estimated inlet manifold pressure reading. So if our map pressure fails, this is going to be what it references in terms of an inlet manifold pressure reading to be able to calculate something like engine load and therefore calculate a proper fueling and spark timing delivered to the engine. So it's important that we have a value here that's going to be accurate and represent what the actual inlet manifold pressure is going to be at a throttle angle and engine speed. So calibrating this table is fairly easy. We'll talk about how to do that here in just a little bit. And we can calibrate this either driving through each cell point live or going in and just driving, maybe doing a 10-20 minute drive, coming back in here, and then being able to use the time plot and go through different portions of the actual time plot, and then we can calibrate it that way. So there's two different options, and gives a little bit of flexibility to get this table dialed in. Now you want to make sure before you actually dial this table in that your main VE table here is 100% calibrated, meaning that as you're going in here and you're going through particular cell points, whatever your target desired lambda here is requesting for a desired lambda, this volumetric efficiency value is allowing you to hit the desired lambda. That means that you've calibrated everything. Then you can go use your VE table values here that are correct and that are calibrated properly, and then you can populate those into this estimate table tuning, as we'll find here in this tutorial. Now before we do anything here, we want to go in and take a look at setting up some of our background details here to make sure that this estimate table is going to be calculating things properly. I'll explain what this means here as we go through. So first thing, we're going to find our ambient pressure sensor. This is super important for working in the estimate table population and calibrating. We're going to find here, if we go down our various different options, we're going to find that the pressure right now is reading 102.3 kPa. We can see that the state is showing it that it's an estimated value. We can see that it's giving us different options here. Standard, estimate, default, or sensor, there's a measured value. We can find here that this is the estimated option, which is taking a look at the mode it's set to enabled here. So when we set this to enable, when our engine is not running, so key on engine off, you can see here 0 RPM, the ambient pressure will match what the inlet manifold pressure is showing. So every time you key on engine off, Motec will update your ambient pressure reference or reading. So that's going to be if we don't have an actual ambient pressure sensor hardwired to the Motec to do the dedicated reading. So every time, again, key on engine off, anytime the engine goes to 0, the ambient pressure will be re-indexed to what your inlet manifold pressure is reading. If we have the option set here to disable, we'll find the state goes to default, and whatever we put here for the default value, that's what the ambient pressure is going to reference, your barrel pressure is going to be referencing here. So in this case, I have the default set at 80 kPa, and we can see it showing pressure as 80. We can see that also represented down here, ambient pressure 80. Now this is important because if we take a look here at something like our inlet manifold pressure estimate main table, we can find I'm calling out a value here of 100. This is going to be taking a look at what the inlet manifold pressure sensor is reading, also what the ambient pressure sensor is reading. And it'll go ahead and utilize that for the estimate manifold pressure. We can see right here it's actually showing 80. So we want to make sure that the ambient pressure is actually accurate. I would not recommend to set it to the default option. I'd always recommend to set at least to the enable. So at the very least, as you're calibrating and tuning, it'll take a look at your last key on engine off manifold pressure reading to determine ambient pressure. Now, the best option here is to actually add an actual sensor in here, and you go ahead and set it up on an analog voltage input and do the voltage to pressure sensor correlation.
Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.